October 8, 1996. Somewhere over the deep blue waters of the Aegean Sea, 7 months after the Mirage'S crisis nearly pushed two NATO allies into war. A pair of Hellenic Air Force Mirage 2000 fighters slice through the morning sky, their delta wings catching the Mediterranean sun. Their radars scan the airspace. A Turkish F-16D has ventured too close to Greek-controlled territory. The intercept begins. What happens next will remain disputed for decades. The Greek pilots reported seeing the Turkish jet catch fire. One parachute emerged. The Turkish pilot did not survive. The co-pilot ejected and was later rescued by Greek forces. Turkey denied their aircraft had been shot down. Greece denied shooting it down. But years later, Turkey's defense minister would claim the F-16 was destroyed by a Greek Mirage 2000 using an R-550 Magic II missile. If you find stories like this fascinating, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning to understand how French engineering transformed a fleet of fighters into the iron fist of the Hellenic Air Force. Sun Tzu wrote over 2,000 years ago that the art of war is of vital importance to the state, a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. In the summer of 1985, the leaders of Greece understood this principle intimately. They looked across the Aegean at their neighbor Turkey, a nation with whom tensions had simmered since the 1974 Cyprus crisis. They looked at their aging fleet of Mirage F-1 fighters, workhorses that had served faithfully since 1975 but were approaching obsolescence. And they made a decision that would reshape the balance of air power in the eastern Mediterranean for the next 4 decades. Greece signed a $1.38 billion contract with Dassault Aviation of France. The deal was for 40 Mirage 2000 aircraft, 36 single-seat fighters, and 4 two-seat trainers. But this was not simply a purchase, it was an industrial partnership. The contract included weapons, equipment, and critically industrial offsets that would permit the Hellenic aerospace industry to produce the powerful Snecma M53P2 engines that would propel these aircraft through the sky at twice the speed of sound. To understand what the Greeks were acquiring, one must first understand what Dassault had created. The Mirage 2000 was born from the ashes of an ambitious failure. In the early 1970s, France had pursued a variable geometry swing-wing aircraft called the Super Mirage G8A. It was over-engineered, prohibitively expensive, costing 2.5 times more than the proven Mirage F-1. When European nations began ordering the American F-16 instead of French aircraft, the reality of the marketplace delivered its verdict. On December 18, 1975, France's National Defense Council canceled the Super Mirage project, but from this cancellation emerged something revolutionary. Dassault's engineers had been quietly developing a secondary project they called the Delta 1000. A return to the elegant simplicity of the original Delta Wing Mirage design, but incorporating every technological advancement of the intervening decades. This aircraft would become the Mirage 2000, and at that same fateful council meeting in December 1975, 3 prototypes were ordered. The genius of the Mirage 2000 lay in how Dassault's engineers solved the fundamental problem that had plagued Delta Wing aircraft since the 1950s. The classic Delta configuration offered tremendous advantages: low drag, a reduced radar cross-section, ideal high-speed aerodynamics, and, most importantly, an enormous internal volume that could accommodate far more fuel than conventional designs. The wing area of 41 square meters meant a wing loading of just 77 pounds per square foot at takeoff weight, making the aircraft far more maneuverable than the larger F-15 or the similarly sized F-16. But Delta Wings came with a curse. At low speeds and high angles of attack, they became difficult to control. The landing approaches were hot and fast. The ability to engage in turning dogfights was compromised. The original Mirage 3 had struggled with these limitations throughout its operational life. The engineers at Dassault attacked this problem with revolutionary technology. They embedded into the Mirage 2000 something they called relaxed stability. They deliberately placed the aircraft's center of gravity ahead of its center of pressure. In aerodynamic terms, this is inherently unstable. A conventional aircraft designed this way would pitch uncontrollably within seconds of leaving the ground, but Dassault connected this unstable airframe to a fly-by-wire flight control system with 4 analog computers that continuously adjusted the control surfaces hundreds of times per second. The pilot simply moved the stick where he wanted to go. The computers figured out how to make the airplane comply. The first prototype made its maiden flight on March 10, 1978, at Dassault's facility at Istres. Test pilot Jean Courreau took the aircraft aloft for 65 minutes, during which he accelerated past Mach 1 without even engaging the afterburner, then climbed above 12,000 meters and pushed the speed past Mach 1.3. By the end of May, the prototype had exceeded Mach 2, but it was at the Farnborough Air Show in September of that year that the world saw what the fly-by-wire system truly enabled. Dassault test pilot Guy Mito-Mourad performed a maneuver that would have killed any pilot flying a conventional Delta. He pulled the aircraft's nose up to a 25-degree angle of attack while slowing to just 190 kilometers per hour, less than 100 knots. The aircraft remained perfectly stable, perfectly controllable. Later tests would demonstrate the Mirage 2000 could attain 30 degrees angle of attack while carrying external fuel tanks and weapons. The Delta had been tamed. Now imagine you are a young Greek pilot, perhaps 25 years old, standing on the tarmac at Tanagra Air Base on April 27, 1988. Behind you stands the operations building of the newly formed 331 Squadron, named Theseus, after the ancient Greek hero who slew the Minotaur. Before you, taxiing in with its distinctive triangular silhouette, is the first Mirage 2000 ever to wear Greek colors, serial number 200. The designation on its fuselage reads EG, Export Greece. The heat waves shimmer off the concrete. The high-pitched whine of the M53 engine fills your ears. The canopy catches the Aegean sunlight. You have trained in France for months, learning every system, every procedure. You have made mistakes in the simulator that would have meant your death in real combat. Now the aircraft that will be your partner for the next decade of your life sits before you, waiting. The aircraft the Greeks received was based on the Mirage 2000C that had entered French Air Force service in 1983. But it was not identical. Dassault had fitted their export fighters with a distinct integrated countermeasures system designated ICMS Mark I, characterized by 2 small antennas mounted near the top of the tall vertical fin. The Greeks initially armed these aircraft with the R-550 Matra Magic II missile, a highly maneuverable, infrared-guided weapon for close-range dogfighting. About a year after the first squadron formed, on August 11, 1989, the 332 Squadron stood up. They called themselves Geraki, Hawk. Their emblem depicted a hawk soaring over the map of Greece, the national flag in the corner. By July 15, 1990, both squadrons had reached full operational status. The personnel was redistributed between them to ensure equivalent levels of experience and capability. But even as these new squadrons became combat-ready, French and Greek engineers were already working on the next phase of transformation, the Talos Modernization Project. The name Talos carries weight in Greek mythology. Talos was the bronze automaton, a giant constructed by Hephaestus to protect the island of Crete. He would circle the island 3 times daily, hurling boulders at enemy ships that approached. He was, in essence, an ancient guided weapon system, and the project that would bear his name would transform the Greek Mirage'S into something far more dangerous than when they had left the Dassault production line. Throughout the 1990s, the Hellenic aerospace industry, working under the supervision of Dassault and Thomson CSF, executed a comprehensive upgrade package. The aircraft received a vastly improved RDM-3 radar set. The defensive countermeasures suite was enhanced. Most significantly, the Greek Mirage'S gained the ability to carry the Super 530D medium-range missile and the AIM-39 Exocet Block II anti-ship missile. Consider the implications. Before Talos, the Greek Mirage'S could engage enemy aircraft only at close range, within visual distance, using heat-seeking missiles. The pilot had to maneuver behind an enemy, achieving a favorable position where the magic missile seeker could acquire the target's hot exhaust. After Talos, a Greek pilot could detect an enemy aircraft far beyond visual range with the improved radar, designate it as a target, and launch a radar-guided missile that would fly out to intercept while the pilot remained at a safe distance. And the Exocet gave the Greek Mirage'S a new role entirely. No longer were they purely air superiority fighters. Now they could sweep in low over the Aegean, acquire a surface vessel with their radars, and launch a sea-skimming missile that would approach just meters above the waves, virtually invisible to shipboard defenses until the final seconds before impact. In 1999, the Exocet capability was formally integrated, and the aircraft received new designations. The single-seaters became Mirage 2000 EGM. The two-seat trainers became 2000 BGM. The M suffix denoted marine, sea attack capable. But even as Talos was completed, the strategic situation in the eastern Mediterranean was shifting again. On January 30, 1996, Greek and Turkish forces nearly went to war over two uninhabited rocky islets called Emia by the Greeks and Kardak by the Turks. The crisis was diffused through American diplomatic intervention, but it served as a stark reminder that the Aegean remained one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world. The Greek Air Force analyzed the lessons of their near conflict. They watched the American F-16s demonstrate beyond visual range combat in the Gulf War and over the Balkans. They observed how the evolution of air-to-air missiles was extending engagement ranges from tens of kilometers to over 100, and they concluded that the Talos upgraded Mirage'S, formidable as they were, would need yet another transformation to remain competitive into the 21st century. If you're enjoying this deep dive into military aviation history, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment. Your engagement helps the channel continue producing content like this. In August of 2000, Greece placed a new order worth $1.1 billion. 15 new-build Mirage 2005 Mark II fighters, the most advanced variant Dassault had ever produced. And 10 existing EGM airframes would be upgraded to the same standard, creating a total fleet of 25 of the most capable Mirage'S in the world. The selection of which airframes to upgrade was not arbitrary. Engineers from the Hellenic aerospace industry examined each of the original 40 aircraft and chose the 10 single-seaters with the lowest levels of accumulated fuselage fatigue. These would be the candidates for the transformation that lay ahead. What did the Mark II designation represent? It was essentially an entirely new aircraft wearing the familiar Mirage silhouette. The centerpiece was the Thales RDY-2 radar. RDY stood for Radar Doppler Multi-Target. This was not merely an improved version of the earlier RDM systems. This was a completely new sensor that could track 24 targets simultaneously and engage 8 of them while guiding 4 missiles to different targets at the same time. It featured synthetic aperture ground mapping capability and a moving target indicator function. The radar could operate in air-to-air, air-to-ground, and air-to-sea modes, making the aircraft truly multi-role. The RDY-2 also introduced something called forward-looking infrared targeting capability. Combined with the Damocles laser designation pod, the upgraded Mirage'S could now identify ground targets at extended ranges and guide precision munitions with devastating accuracy. But a radar is only as effective as its integration with the aircraft's defensive systems. French engineers equipped the Greek Mirage'S with the ICMS Mark III, the most advanced electronic countermeasure suite Dassault had developed. This digital system incorporated radar warning receivers, missile approach warning sensors, and active jamming capabilities that could deceive or disrupt enemy targeting systems. The pilots received an entirely new interface with their aircraft. The earlier Mirage'S had conventional analog cockpits with round dial instruments. The Mark II introduced a glass cockpit based on technology developed for Dassault's next-generation Rafale fighter. Multiple high-resolution color displays replaced dozens of individual gauges. Information could be reconfigured at the pilot's command, presenting exactly the data needed for each phase of flight or combat. The head-up display was upgraded to a wide-angle unit that projected critical flight and weapons information onto the canopy in front of the pilot's eyes, allowing him to keep his head up and eyes outside the cockpit during the most demanding maneuvers. The HOTAS system was refined. HOTAS means hands-on throttle and stick. Every control the pilot might need in combat was placed under his fingertips, either on the throttle in his left hand or the control stick in his right. He could select weapons, switch radar modes, designate targets, activate countermeasures, and control nearly every aircraft function without ever removing his hands from the primary flight controls. In the split-second violence of a modern air engagement, this integration could mean the difference between victory and death. Navigation received an equally dramatic upgrade. The old Ulyss 52 inertial navigation system was replaced with the Thales Totem 3000. This new system used ring laser gyroscopes and integrated GPS receivers to provide far greater accuracy, higher reliability, and shorter alignment time. A pilot could start his aircraft and be ready to taxi faster than ever before. And once airborne, his position would be known with precision measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. But perhaps the most significant addition was the capability to carry and employ the Mika missile. Mika stood for Missile d'Interception et de Combat Aérien. It was the weapon that would allow Greek pilots to truly dominate beyond visual range combat. Unlike the older Super 530D, which required continuous radar illumination throughout its entire flight, Mika used an active radar seeker in its nose. The launching aircraft would provide the missile with initial targeting data and updates during the early portion of its flight. Then, when the missile closed to within acquisition range of the target, its own radar would activate and guide itself to intercept. This fire-and-forget capability meant the Greek pilot could immediately maneuver defensively or engage a second target after launching the first missile. The Greeks acquired Mika in two versions. The Mika EM used the active radar seeker for all-weather beyond visual range engagements. The Mika IR used an imaging infrared seeker for shorter-range combat, where the extreme maneuverability of a heat-seeking missile provided advantages. Both versions could be carried simultaneously, giving the pilot flexibility to respond to whatever threat emerged. And for strikes against strategic ground targets, the Mark II could carry the Scalp EG cruise missile. Scalp stood for Système de Croisière Autonome à Longue Portée, extended general purpose. This was a stealthy turbojet-powered weapon that could fly hundreds of kilometers at low altitude, following terrain contours to avoid detection, before striking hardened targets with its powerful warhead. No Greek Air Force aircraft had ever possessed this kind of reach. The transformation began with a meticulous validation process. Between the summer of 2003 and 2006, a joint Greek-French team called IFEPG conducted extensive flight testing of the new radar and countermeasure systems to verify they met their specifications. Every mode of the RDY-2 was tested. Every function of the ICMS Mark III was evaluated. Only after this rigorous evaluation would the aircraft be considered ready for operational service. On March 1, 2007, 331 Squadron handed over all its remaining Talos upgraded EGM aircraft to 332 Squadron. This consolidated the older Mirages in one unit while preparing 331 to receive the new Mark II variants. 2 months later, on May 3rd, the first Mirage 2005 touched down at Tanagra. And then came a moment that marked the end of an era. On November 23, 2007, the last Mirage 2000 ever built rolled off the Dassault production line at Bordeaux-Mérignac. After nearly 3 decades of production, after over 600 aircraft delivered to 9 nations, after transforming air forces from Peru to Taiwan, from India to the United Arab Emirates, the final example wore Greek colors. Serial number 525, delivered directly to Tanagra, where it would serve alongside its siblings in 331 Squadron. Think about what that means. Of all the air forces that operated the Mirage 2000, it was Greece that received the very last aircraft. It was a Greek pilot who would be the final pilot to accept a new Mirage 2000 from Dassault. The production line was then shut down forever, and the tools and jigs were stored away. The Greek Air Force had obtained not merely an aircraft, but a piece of aviation history. The visual differences between the Mark II and the older EGM variants were subtle but distinctive. The most obvious was the nose. The earlier aircraft featured a prominent pitot tube extending forward from the radome. The Mark II eliminated this feature because the new RDY-2 radome design integrated the identification friend or foe interrogator antennas directly into its structure. To a trained observer, a Mirage without the pitot probe was immediately identifiable as a Mark II. Another distinction was the hardpoint configuration. The standard Mirage could carry weapons on 9 external stations. The Mark II added 4 additional hardpoints under the fuselage specifically designed to carry Mika missiles. This gave the aircraft a formidable air-to-air loadout while leaving the wing pylons available for fuel tanks or ground attack munitions. All Greek Mirages, both the new Mark IIs and the surviving EGM aircraft, received one critical commonality: the Thales Totem 3000 navigation system. This ensured that even the older aircraft benefited from the improved navigation accuracy and reliability. Engineers also added a hose and drogue aerial refueling capability to both variants, allowing extended range operations when supported by tanker aircraft. The Greek Air Force could now project power far beyond the immediate Aegean theater. Let me take you inside the cockpit of a Greek Mirage 2005 Mark II during a typical intercept mission. The pilot, call him Kostas, sits in a SEMMB Mark 10-00 ejection seat, a license-built version of the British Martin Baker design that can save his life even at 0 altitude and 0 airspeed. Before him stretches a bank of multifunction displays glowing with green and amber symbology. To his right, a side-stick controller. To his left, a throttle assembly bristling with buttons and switches, the scramble horn sounds. Turkish F-16s have been detected approaching the Athens Flight Information Region boundary. Kostas is airborne in minutes, the afterburner of his M53P2 engine throwing 65 kilonewtons of dry thrust and 95 kilonewtons in full burner. The aircraft leaps into the Aegean sky, accelerating past 700 kilometers per hour before he even has the gear retracted. At altitude, he turns southwest, guided by the E-3 AWACS aircraft orbiting over the Greek mainland. The RDY-2 radar paints the sky ahead, and 2 contacts appear on his display. Range, 120 kilometers, closing speed, 1,800 kilometers per hour combined. He designates both contacts and selects Mika-EM missiles on his left wing pylons. The Turkish aircraft alter course, turning back toward Turkish airspace before crossing the boundary. Costas follows at a distance, his radar maintaining lock. The dance of brinkmanship plays out as it has hundreds of times since the Aegean tensions began. Today, there will be no intercept, no confrontation. But both pilots know that the invisible geometry of radar and missile envelopes has determined the outcome. The Mirage's sensors reached further, locked faster. The Turkish pilots made their calculation and withdrew. This is modern air combat. It is won and lost in the electronic domain as much as in the physical. The pilot who can see further, lock earlier and launch, first holds the decisive advantage. French engineers understood this when they designed the RDY-2. Greek tacticians understood it when they procured the Mirage 2005. But let us not forget that the older EGM variants remained in service with 332 Squadron, and these aircraft still had teeth. The Super 530D missile, while lacking the fire-and-forget capability of Mika, could still engage targets at extended range when the pilot maintained radar lock. The Exocet anti-ship missile remained one of the most feared weapons in any naval commander's nightmares. And in close-range dogfighting, the Magic II was still a deadly weapon in the hands of a skilled pilot. Sun Tzu wrote that the good fighter will be terrible in his onset and prompt in his decision. The energy developed by good fighting men is as the momentum of a round stone rolled down a mountain thousands of feet in height. This describes perfectly what the Greek Mirage force represented. The energy of French engineering expertise, accumulated over decades of jet fighter development, rolling downhill toward any adversary foolish enough to challenge Greek sovereignty over the Aegean. Consider the training regimen these pilots endured. Every pilot flying the Mirage 2000 underwent initial training in France before transitioning to operational conversion at Tanagra. They flew simulated combat against French Rafale pilots, against F-16 pilots in exercises with other NATO nations, against each other in the demanding environment of overwater operations where a moment's disorientation could send an aircraft into the sea. On April 12, 2018, this reality struck home with terrible force. A Mirage 2005 was scrambled as part of a two-ship formation to intercept Turkish F-16s that had entered disputed airspace near Skyros. By the time the Greek aircraft arrived, the Turkish jets had already departed. But in the process of returning to base, one of the Mirages crashed into the Aegean. The pilot, flying low in poor visibility caused by Saharan dust in the air, could not recover. He was eliminated in the crash. This tragedy reminds us that for all the technological sophistication of modern fighters, they are still flown by men and women of flesh and blood. The aircraft can calculate 1,000 variables per second, but it cannot account for the dust in the air or the split-second decision that places a pilot in a position from which there is no recovery. The relationship between French engineers and Greek operators was not merely contractual. It evolved into a genuine partnership. In December 2019, Greece contracted a €260 million deal for maintenance of the Mirage 2005 fleet with Dassault Aviation, Safran Military Engines, and Thales. This ensured that French expertise would remain available to keep the aircraft in peak operational condition. And when the Greek government announced in 2020 that it would modernize 10 additional Mirage 2000 airframes to the 5 standard, it was again French companies that would perform the work. The total fleet of Mirage 2005s would rise to 35 aircraft, a formidable force by any measure. But all aircraft eventually reached the end of their operational lives. The Mirage 2000, for all its capabilities, was designed in the 1970s. Its basic aerodynamics, while brilliantly refined, could not match the latest fifth-generation stealth fighters. In 2020, Greece announced the purchase of 18 Dassault Rafale fighters, the spiritual successor to the Mirage. And in 2024, Greece became the first European nation to finalize a contract for American F-35 stealth fighters. The writing is on the wall for the Greek Mirage's. The older EGM-BGM variants were retired in 2022. As of 2025, Greece is actively seeking buyers for these aircraft, with India identified as a potential customer interested in obtaining spare parts and possibly additional airframes to support its own Mirage fleet. The Mark II variants will serve longer, their more modern avionics and superior capabilities justifying continued investment. But even these aircraft will eventually transition from frontline fighters to training platforms to museum exhibits. The last Mirage 2000 ever built will someday stand silent in a hangar, its engines cold, a monument to an era of aviation history. Yet the legacy of French engineering and Greek service extends far beyond the aircraft themselves. The industrial relationships forged through the Mirage program created the foundation for subsequent Greek aerospace development. The Hellenic aerospace industry gained capabilities in engine production, avionics integration, and structural modification that would never have existed without the Mirage program. A generation of Greek engineers learned their trade working alongside French counterparts on Talos and the Mark II upgrade. And the pilots themselves carried forward a tradition of excellence. The tactics developed over decades of flying Mirages, the institutional knowledge of how to employ Delta Wing fighters in the challenging Aegean environment, the hard-won lessons of countless intercepts and near confrontations with Turkish aircraft, all of this now forms part of the intellectual heritage of the Hellenic Air Force. There is something almost poetic about the arc of the Greek Mirage story. In 1975, when Greek Air Force planners first contemplated replacing their American-built F-104 Starfighters and F-102 Delta Daggers, they turned to France and the Mirage F-1. That earlier Delta gave Greece a decade of capable service before the Mirage 2000 arrived to succeed it. In 1988, when the first Mirage 2000 EG touched down at Tanagra, Greece was a nation still emerging from the shadow of military dictatorship, eager to prove itself as a modern European democracy capable of defending its sovereignty. The aircraft represented more than military capability. It represented national aspiration. By 2007, when the last Mirage 2000 ever built joined the Greek fleet, the nation had transformed, member of the European Union, host of the Olympic Games. A voice in international affairs far beyond what its geographic size might suggest. The Mirage had evolved alongside its operators, and now as the Rafale and eventually the F-35 take their place in Greek hangars, the Mirages await their final chapter. Some will be sold, some will be preserved, all will eventually fade from operational memory as new generations of pilots learn their trade on newer machines. But for those who flew them, for those who maintained them, for those who watched them thunder into the Aegean sky with afterburners blazing, the Greek Mirages will always represent something unique. They were the aircraft that kept the peace by being prepared for war. They were the visible symbol of a nation's determination to control its own destiny. And they were, in the end, a remarkable demonstration of what French engineering genius could achieve when partnered with Greek operational demands. Sun Tzu concluded his meditation on war by noting that the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in advance. The Greeks made their calculations in 1985 when they ordered the Mirage 2000. They made further calculations in the 1990s with Talos. They made their final calculations in 2000 with the Mark II program. Each time, they anticipated what air combat would demand in the years ahead. Each time, French engineers delivered the solutions. The Mirage's secret was never truly a secret at all. It was the application of relentless engineering improvement to a proven airframe. It was the willingness to invest in comprehensive upgrades rather than settle for incremental modifications. It was the understanding that in the unforgiving world of military aviation, good enough is never good enough. The Delta wings that once seemed a compromise between performance and handling became, through fly-by-wire technology, the optimal solution for both. The radar that once could track a handful of targets became capable of managing an entire aerial battlefield. The missiles that once required the pilot to guide them all the way to impact became autonomous hunters that freed the pilot to survive. If you've made it this far, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for this remarkable aircraft and the partnership that made it possible. Consider subscribing for more deep dives into military aviation history. Leave a comment telling me what aircraft you'd like me to cover next. The Greek Mirage 2000 was never just an aircraft. It was a statement of national identity, a guarantee of security, a bond between two nations with a shared appreciation for technical excellence. And above all, it was the product of French engineers who took a good design and, decade after decade, transformed it into something extraordinary. The last Mirage 2000 ever built still flies from Tanagra. Its pilot carries forward a tradition that stretches back to Jean Coureau's first flight in 1978. And when he pushes the throttle forward and feels the M53 engine he thundered to life, he is connected to every pilot who ever strapped into a Delta-winged Dassault fighter and climbed into the sky to meet whatever challenge awaited. The mountains of Greece have watched warriors rise to defend their homeland for 3,000 years. The waters of the Aegean have carried ships of war since the days of Themistocles and the Battle of Salamis. And now, for 4 decades, the skies above those ancient lands have been guarded by French-built aircraft bearing Greek colors. The era is ending. The Rafale is arriving. The F-35 is coming. But the Mirage's secret, the secret of how French engineers transformed a good fighter into a great one, will endure as long as there are those who remember what it meant to see that distinctive Delta silhouette rising from Tanagra into the Aegean dawn.